So, our next speaker is Dora Olah from the University of Sheffield, and the title of the presentation is Early Bronze Age Aegean Marble Figurines as Storytellers of Human Interactions.
So, first of all, thank you very much for this conference and for the opportunity and for coming to listen our presentations. I have been doing a PhD at the University of Sheffield dealing with these special artifacts, the early Bronze Age marble figurines, which function still and roles still remain enigmatic. But how I can connect with my research into this conference, what I would like to illustrate now in the next 25 minutes, that what and how these figurines can tell us about their life story from their beginning of their manufacture till their final deposition. And through these trajectories, I would like to show or illustrate the different kind of interactions in time, space, and in the different level of the social unit as well. So these figurines appeared in the early Bronze Age, predominantly in the well-investigated Cycladic islands in Crete and the Greek mainland, but there is a very important amount from Anatolia as well, and the north and the west Aegean, and they develop from local origins. The agency is a unifying factor. Regardless, the modern political borders now always unified or linked together these culturally and geographically different areas. And the Cycladic islands, the seafarer, took always the main principal intermediary in this continuous connection and communication. And through this continuous communication and communication system, through this trade system, different kind of products were circulating, and I would like to emphasize that on the base of these figures, it's important to make differences between the import ones, whether they were just raw materials or final products. Also, make difference between the local copies and the local variants. So, predominantly, they were made from marbles because of the very rich marble resources, especially in the Cycladic islands or in western Anatolia. And if the marble was not available, they used different kind of local stones. And in the North Aegean and the West Aegean, also some more perishable materials were very common as shell or bone. Just to briefly introduce their iconography, they geographically show differences. The Cycladic one, we can see a chronological development from the more schematic one towards the more naturalistic types, which development culminated in the canonization of the folded arm figurines with different local variants. And it's important just to also comment that the majority of these representations were females. To take a look into the Anatolian examples, they are mainly schematic figurines, and they have a lot of similarities with the Cycladic violin types, but these figurines also developed from local origins. And if we have a look into the Cretan types, we can see how the import existed besides the local variants and the local copies parallel at the same time. And also, if we have a closer look into the surface of these figurines, we can trace pigments, and also very common that the main anatomical details were incised or carved. If we take a closer look, we can see that sometimes the pigments cannot preserve very well, but it's very common that we can see these very shaded contour lines, which are the so-called paint gauze, which could have functioned as a guideline for the paintings. And it's an interesting question that whether all of them were painted, we can just not trace in all of them the pigments, or just some of them had these special treatments. And I had the chance last year to go to a research trip to Anatolia, to Turkey, and I could analyze the Anatolian figurines from a much closer aspect, and I didn't notice any kind of traces of any kind of pigments, but in this stage we can't be now sure that whether the Anatolian one could have been painted or not. But I would like to emphasize that these physical characteristics and iconographical analyzations are not supplying enough information for further investigations if we would like to trace their functions and role. Because the reinvention of these figurines by the modern art implanted a more artistic value into these figurines, which simulated and inspired forgery, looting activity, and illicit trade in the art market. And basically, in my research, what I would like to emphasize that I want to, following the latest approaches, I want to regard these objects as artifacts rather than a piece of art. And that's why that in my research, I'm collecting every pieces which are coming from secure context, from archaeological excavation. And here I just wanted to show the distribution of the data with what I have been dealing with. So this is my main point, that I'm collecting every pieces from secure provenance with archaeological context, creating a database, and try to use these figurines using different kind of criteria to look for any kind of discernible patterns or rules for further investigation. And what we can see that the major part of these figurines are from burials. And it's interesting just to, first of all, have a look into the position that they were very unstable. They were not able to stand up. They had this reclining position, and this could have been a suggestion that they might have been placed primarily for the burials, and they were manufactured for burial or burial reason. And if we see the examples, what I see now collecting the data from the cemeteries, that I try to use different kinds of criteria, such as the gender of the deceased, the age of the deceased, or the assemblage, the grave gods. What is interesting that in Anatolia, a huge amount has an association with children burials. Regarding the assemblage, it's very difficult to see any kind of pattern, because what we can see that sometimes they are coming from very richly furnished graves, from next to besides other very rich materials, but sometimes they are just only one grave gods in the graves. And also there are a significant amount which are coming from domestic context associated with the settlements. What I can see now that the majority have a close association with structures or buildings in the settlements. I also have different kind of criteria that I try to analyze, and it's interesting to see that whether there is any kind of evidence for the local manufacture of the figurines, as in picture, one of the most well investigated sites, Carcass, where they found 52 figurines and 42 were schematic ones, and they all had association with buildings and structures, and 16 came from only one building, which had a lot of evidence for marble manufacture. And also interesting to see that the other figurines, the rest of the figurines, were naturalistic, and they had no association with any kind of structural buildings. They just came from the open areas. And comparing this with the Anatolian examples, they are less well investigated. So unfortunately, I haven't got as detailed data and informations about their exact position and archaeological context. But what I can see that they have a strong association with the building areas as well. And interesting to compare Skarkos with another settlement, Aegean, where only 5 figurines were found in early Bronze Age context. And they had also an association with the building areas. And according to Wilson, they might have been deposited ritually and deliberately, maybe for kind of apotropic function. And Aegean shows an interesting example that apart from these 5 figurines, the rest of the figurines came from much later Middle and Late Bronze Age context, which can raise the question that what was the primary use of these figurines, because this context is definitely not their primary context of the figurines. And what is also interesting in these recontextualized example, when we analyze these recontextualized examples, that to see that dominantly they are fragmented and they were found broken. And there is another type of context, neither not burial, neither domestic. I call them special deposits, which has the most significant example from Keros, 2 deposits. What is very interesting that hundreds of figurines were found, not just figurines, other artifacts as well, and all of them were broken. And regarding the broken fragments of the figurines, they were deliberately broken and they were possibly brought to the island. And it's interesting to compare or have a look into the settlement Daskalio, which is just next to Keros. I had the chance to take part in the Daskalio and Keros project 2 years ago with the University of Cambridge, and that's why I brought these 2 photos. It's interesting to see that in Daskalio there are figurines, but none of them were broken, and they are more schematic ones. But in the ritual deposits, the majority of the figurines are more naturalistic, and all of them, all of them are just fragments. And in the case of this ritual deposit, it's very sensitive, and I would be very careful with the interpretation as a ritual, as a sanctuary, as an early Bronze Age sanctuary. There are other theories that maybe this kind of deliberate deposition could have been a kind of destroyment of the values of these figurines, and the end of the early Bronze Age. After that, they disappeared as well. And as we saw, that a lot of time they were broken. And it's very interesting to understand that whether the breakage was intentional or just accidental. What I saw in Turkey, that these schematic Anatolian figurines have a very vulnerable neck part, and the majority of the breakage occurred at the neck, as we can see on the photo as well. But the Cycladic ones, there is no any discernible patterns regarding the position of the breakage. But definitely this can show towards further analysis that they must have manipulated with these figurines, they must have used them. And if they were broken, they had to be mended as well. and there are also Asian repairs sometimes. And again, this can be an important evidence for their usage. But the intention behind this, it's very difficult to detect that for what reason they could have used them. So what we could see that these figurines can supply evidences for human interactions in different time, whether it happened in the early Bronze Age or during later manipulations, in different space, geographically, or also regarding the different archaeological contexts. And we can see also in different level of the social unit, whether it happened in a culture or in a community or as an individual. And the practice of paintings and breaking and repairing can suggest further analyzations about their usage, that they should have been used, but we cannot know this yet for what reason. So my main goal is to raise more and more questions rather than creating theories. But I'm hoping that when I'm gonna collect and finish my database or completing as far as I can, I will be able to see some patterns or rules which can shed light more on their function and roles. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dora, also for keeping your time excellently. So we have time for questions.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a question. I think that you told that in Anatolia, many figurines were found in children burials. Do you know anything about their dimensions? I mean, do you know if they're the same big as the ones in Greece or in the Cyclades? Are they smaller because they're in children graves?
The Anatolian graves were Peter's burials, so they were not the same type of graves. But the figurines. No, I didn't notice any kind of. Actually, this can be a good viewpoint or criteria what I can analyze. But there is no. I didn't notice anything changing, because they are not coming just only from the children burials, but there is no. And the problem with the Anatolian ones, that they are not very well investigated and also not very well published. So I don't have always exact the enough information. Sometimes I also cannot see that whether I can't calculate with the age of the disease, because it's just not obvious from the publication.
Alexander?
Yeah, I have a question just to provide since your study at home, which I haven't been able to sort of find any good reason to, but is there any particular reason to think that they weren't breaking the sculptures on carrots and then removing pieces? Because I mean, always sort of the breaking also I can bring in. I understand the reason
Yes.
and then deliberately broken, but I've never been able to see a reason why we're not thinking it's actually occurring and it's just a removal process as well.
You mean that the breakage happened in Keros?
Yeah.
But the problem is that the figurines must have been taken into Keros, but because they are not complete, they are just fragments. This is also interesting, that it's like a puzzle. It looks like that they were just one fragments from a complete one, and that what that they. But it's also again a good viewpoint what I can investigate more.
Because you sort of brought it up, the best counter-argument that I've read is brood banks.
Yes.
Really, we've got that Indonesia has this very sort of well-developed network structure to it already. You probably have trade flows going to them participating in the process. But I wonder, are those distinctions between economic and ritual activity?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not our own arbitrary dichotomy. We may have been quite a bit more fused at that time.
Well, with the fragmentation, it's also interesting to analyze that why they were fragmented. What was the intention behind this? A kind of destroying their values and taking out from their usage, and this is what I cannot be sure about this now. But I'm hoping that with more and more data that I can fit into my database, I can see more. And right now, I don't know now that.
Yes?
I just want to jump into your previous conversation. You're right that technically speaking, we could have the removal of parts. However, and you may correct me if I'm wrong, but most of them are complete. We don't have joints, and these are many. And okay, people do conform to rules, but we know that there's always going to be the odd one out, will be the exception. So if there is no exception at all, as much as it is technically feasible, it would be more plausible to think that the breakage happened somewhere else, so they didn't have any option for an exception. That's, I don't know.
I think it's good.
Sure.
Certainly, Anatolia said you miss part of the neck, so it's because it was the thin part, so
It's
something that's why you miss a part of the figurine. But you can think about later periods. We have ritual killing of vessels, let's say, so we have ritual killing of folks in general. So maybe something like that with figurines. You kill parts and you just put them together in chaos as part of a ritual, as a ritual killing of the
Yes.
object itself.
Yes, because it happened at the end of the phase when these figurines started to disappear, and this could have been a kind of ritual manifestation of this, that they wanted to destroy their values. But it's with the Anatolian one, I can't say that they were accidentally broken because of the vulnerable part. But it's interesting to see that sometimes I can see them on the graves without the head, and the head is missing. And this is interesting, that why the head was taken out. But that can be also just accidentally we cannot find in the graves. And also with settlement contexts, it's interesting that a lot of figurines have also missing head, like in Aegean, and they were probably deliberately deposited there, and whether it had a special meaning of this or not. So there are a lot of interesting things that I can analyze and investigate, but right now I'm still collecting the data, and I try to complete as much as I can. And also the most important is just, using those ones which are coming from secure context and from archaeological excavation.
I would like to come back a little to what Mr. Hoffman said, that you don't have any joints, you don't have any pieces that fit together. So any ritual killing or destruction of the particular pieces would have to have taken place in situ. So it would have been broken on the place that was originally destroyed, and you would certainly find some joints. That way, I realized that there aren't any connections between them, so they are probably discarded. I would rather see them as discarded these connotations, the haptic feeling, will have been relevant for a short period of time, or are they objects that one could use them during his lifetime?
Yes.
Would be buried with him? Are they talismans? Are they depictions of gods? These are actually questions that have tormented research for many years, but I would like to intrigue you into maybe pursuing a more tangible answer to this question.
Yes, but what I can see that possibly they were used for different reasons. I wouldn't say that they were just made for settlement or domestical use or for the burial, because as I showed, the canonized folded down ones has a very unstable position. And now we can see them in the museums upright, but they had to lie down because they couldn't stand up. And this can be a very good evidence for the burial context. But also, yes, it's interesting that when we find them broken in a grave, that whether before they were finally deposited, whether this breakage could mean that they could have been used before the settlement. So it's very interesting to compare the settlements with the cemeteries as well. And yes, what I see now that they must have functioned in different contexts in different way, and they must have used them for several reasons. I don't think so that they had just one role or one function for what, and especially the mendings, the repairs. They are the really good evidences that they must have been used, and even if they were just stood up in the settlements, but they were very fragile and they could have easily broke.
Well, in the same vein, the mendings, the repairs, well, in my view, it doesn't make any sense if you break something intentionally and then you repair it. I would suggest that the repairs imply that the breakage were not intentional. I'm not sure it's just a feeling that we have so many cases of mending, and well, from our perspective, it is difficult to suggest that they were intentionally broken and repaired.
But as I'm saying that I don't want to make theories that all of them were intentionally. We always have to examine each piece in their single context. And it's possible that sometimes they were intentionally broken, and not all of the broken pieces has the repairs.
Exactly.
So what is important for me that, yes, that's why that I'm not trying to create theories about their functions and roles. I want to raise more and more questions, as you ask me as well. And I try to get closer to their mystery. And what is the most important, that I want to see each pieces in their single context, and after looking all together in the database and see any kind of patterns, if there is. Or at least just to see that whether there is enough resource with what I can deal with. Because there is the possibility that we don't have enough pieces from the secure context which can show me something. But at least this can also certify now or confirm that right now I can't go further with this investigation.
Okay, thank you. If it's short, otherwise we'll give it a break. Okay, thank you very much, Dora.